Welcome to the Spawn Chunks, episode number 324, recorded Monday, November 18th, 2024. This is a podcast all about Minecraft, recorded on all of your favorite podcasting platforms, with a video version available on YouTube. Please consider subscribing wherever you're listening to this, because it really does help us out a lot. My name is Joel Duggan, and joining me, as always, is TTRPG expert, Pixel Riffs. Hello, sir.
Hello, I can barely call myself an expert, but it's a credit I will take because I have been playing a lot lately. I joined a couple of TTRPG groups. I've started running some games locally to me, and if you want to hear more about that, you can hear that in the render distance, along with a glowing recommendation that Joel gave for Arcane Season 2 coming out around now. The render distance is the extended version of our podcast. We record a little bit of extra pre- and post-show for our patrons every week, and if you're interested in listening to that, consider supporting us on Patreon over at patreon.com/the Spawn Chunks. Once again, we'll remind you it's probably best to sign up via browser right now because Apple is making changes to the iOS app, or at least Patreon is conforming to Apple changes to the iOS app, and we'll catch up with that stuff probably in the new year. But this end of the year, we don't have all the admin time, and we want to make sure that everything's cool with our current patrons before we start changing things up a little bit about our subscription model. Either way, our patrons are still going to get the usual calendar of events. This month, we have a monthly Minecraft hangout planned for the final Saturday of the month. That's on November 30th at the usual time, and our quarterly hangouts will be coming up in January or February of 2025, so that's where you get the behind-the-scenes report on what's been going on with the podcast numbers-wise. If you're interested in any of that, once again, patreon.com/thespawnchunks.
So what have you been up to in Minecraft this week, my friend?
This week, I have been drafting some builds, which is something I don't make enough time to do, especially when I start a big build project like I've been talking about this city project for a little while. I decided I should probably get on with it. So I've been drafting those up in Creative based on some concept art that I was working from ages ago. This was back when I think Tough was originally added, so 1.17, I guess. Caves and Cliffs Part 1. I started building the foundation of this building that I think the original concept art comes from a kit bash set where you could use some of the pre-built assets this person had provided to model a city for yourself in a 3D modeling environment. And there's some really, really neat renders of it that I decided, let me grab those and see if I can make them into something Minecraft related. I have scaled back on my original interpretation of these because I was trying to fit in as much of the detail as possible, and this original illustration of this gateway has big round windows in it and series of windows kind of going up each side of the build, a connecting bridge, an identical tower on one side, and this enormous like oil drum kind of tank thing. It's this very steampunk looking environment, and I figured that's going to be the entrance or kind of gateway to this monorail that I have as one of the major features of the Windy City area. And I decided that based on the design, I probably wasn't going to have room to fit in all of that detail. So I've scaled it down a little bit, done a bit of a reinterpretation of it, and tried to keep the materials detailed but simple at the same time. A lot of it is mangrove wood, stripped mangrove and planks, red terracotta, a bit of natural terracotta thrown in there as well, and then dark oak wood and a bit of acacia and warped wood with their the closest color copper blocks that you can get to them. So like normal copper and fully oxidized copper as like the pipe work and the big drum of whatever stuff is in there. Like I haven't really got a fictionalized version of it, but I assume it's like an oil drum kind of diesel power kind of thing. And so, yeah, I've been playing around with a few materials, came up with a creative version that I liked, did one tower and then just cloned it to the other side and redid some of the external features, added in a couple of little detail touches like a vent that's kind of leaking some stuff and moss is growing up underneath it. A few like little touches that I think are going to be enough for a draft version in Creative. The way I work in Creative typically is I do about 70% of the build there, and once I've got a feel for it and I understand like these are roughly the dimensions, this is roughly the level of detail and the materials I'm going to use, I'll take it into Survival to build a full version of it. So in Creative I won't detail the back of the tower because I just think I'm just going to figure out what that is. It's probably going to have some other stuff attached to it once I build it in Survival anyway. And so I've just been workshopping a few ideas, build palette, that kind of thing. But I'm really happy with the results. I think this one turned out pretty good, and I'm looking forward to probably building it in Survival sometime this week.
I really like the block palette. Like it really does stick as close as you can in Minecraft to the concept art image that you've shared in our live chat. And uh, it's always tough when you're dealing with that kind of scale. You know, you're trying to figure out where the Minecraft block is going to serve you best. And I mean, when you want to have those round windows, you're like, all right, I either have to make this gargantuan, or, or I have to like change the shape of the window to suit Minecraft a little bit better. But the thing that I find interesting about that work method of like going in and designing like half of something if it's mirrored, or designing the front or a panel, I do the same thing. Like I tend to design a chunk of something, like if, especially if it's a repeatable pattern, like if it's something that has multiple floors and you're like, all right, well, the top three floors are going to be the same, so I'm only going to design one, and I know in my survival world I'm going to like stack those on top of one another. When you move it though, like, are you going to be using like Matica, or are you going to be like roughing out the shapes in survival and then kind of like copying block for block, or kind of using your creative plan as concept art, as opposed to like, I am copying this, block for block into the game?
I think I'm happy enough with it that I want to copy it block for block. I am committed enough to keeping Survival Guide pure vanilla that I'm probably not going to be using Matica.
Right.
So in that case,
right.
It's a matter of noting down dimensions, making sure that I've got the right scale that I start with. Otherwise, you know that struggle where you bring something from creative into survival and it's like one block off in survival, and then you have to like tear down half of it and rebuild, right? So I'm trying not to do that. So I'll note down a few key dimensions for it. I'll take solid screenshots like a front face and a profile, and just try and get as much of the details that might not show up from certain angles as I can. I'll get angles on as much of that as I can, but then I'll just work from those screenshots. The other way I used to do this before they made changes to the Minecraft launcher, and it's actually harder to launch two different profiles from the same launcher, was that I would open up a different instance of Minecraft with a different account, usually like my camera account, load two worlds and have one on the second monitor floating around in creative while I was in survival building the primary one. And I don't do that as much anymore because, like I said, it's a little bit more difficult to keep that straight. I could launch from like Prism Launcher or something and have another account running that way, but then all my worlds would need to be transferred over to that instance of Minecraft, and it's just a hassle. So yeah, lately I just work from screenshots, and I am, I think, good enough at doing that now, and having built it myself, I know the process that I went through to build it, so I can more or less reproduce that in survival now. The one thing I'm doing that I know I need to change is the I guess the depth of the towers. Like, I decided to build them rectangular instead of fully square when I built them in creative, and then when I set back the sort of walkway that connects the two towers, this sort of arched area, I realized that looks good when it's set back one block from the edge of the towers, but then that means it kind of falls off the back edge of the towers because they're not as thick as they are wide. So yeah, I need to change up some of the proportions there, but that should be simple enough to do. And I can just, clone a couple of things in creative if I need to rough that out to see how it looks before I finish the finished version. But yeah, I've been doing that. In Survival Guide itself, I did a bit more time resource gathering, and so I was using the Ender Pearl teleporters that we discussed last week to warp me home from various activities. And one thing I hadn't tried with it, I demonstrated that it can warp you between dimensions. So I talked about like going into the nether and farming quartz for just going mining for quartz for 10 minutes and then having it warp you home when it hits the following day in the overworld. I did the same thing but with end raiding. So I went out and got more shulker shells because I need more shulker boxes in general. I haven't really done a great deal of end raiding recently, but the feeling of going out to the end, knowing that you'll be warped home so you don't have to worry too much about like where you're getting back to, where your nearest end gateway portal is to return to the central island. You don't have to really worry too much about that. As long as you've got XP to mend your elytra and a decent supply of rockets, you can just go and go and go. And that was kind of freeing, actually. So I did that for about an hour. I flew maybe 15,000 blocks. About 15,000 blocks away from the central island. And just went that way as far as I could, finding end cities, grabbing extra elytra, more shulkers, bit of loot. And then just got immediately yoinked back home to my base in the overworld at the end of it, which was really, really good fun. So highly recommend if anybody is still on the fence about that. Unfortunately, as I've been hearing from Bedrock players, Ender Pearls don't load chunks in Bedrock the way they do in Java, so it's unfortunately not an available technology there. But we'll hope that can be the case in future. A few people also pointed out to me that this would allow you, if you're a hardcore mode player and you want to skip the dragon fight, having a timed Ender Pearl circuit in the overworld will allow you to get home. It's still a little bit risky, but if you want to do the thing, normally you would throw all of your possessions into an ender chest and just jump into the void and respawn back at your base, but in hardcore that'd kill you, so you wouldn't be able to do it. You can still get back to the overworld if you have an Ender Pearl waiting and a timer that will reliably set it off. You just have to be ultra sure that it's going to do that before you leave for the end. So, best of luck if you try that method out. But for me, it's just a fun way of getting from A to B without having to think about how to get to B at the end of the day.
That's one of the things that's on my list as a project or a potential project on the Citadel is fighting the Ender Dragon and regenerating our end gateway portals, and then never having to fight the dragon again, letting everybody on the server that we're done, and that the end in the middle, the end island won't be resetting, but the outer end islands will be resetting, and then potentially doing some sort of cool, either sci-fi or just non-themed, just kind of fun. You have the blank palette of the void, in the end island after you remove all the Swiss cheese end stone. To be able to do something cool, and like I'm thinking like some sort of ring that would like encompass and then design sort of like a way to go out to the other end islands. But then maybe now that we've got these Ender Pearl mechanics in the game that are working consistently, having some sort of thing in the middle where like maybe down below whatever facilities we have in this ring, you could set an Ender Pearl and then go out to your end islands and then just not care. Right, just be, and even not being warped back to your base, but like just being warped back to the central end island where the exit portal is, and you can just go back to whatever bed you slept in. Like that would be really useful, I think, especially for some players that get a little turned around in the void when they're out end busting, or people that are worried about dying, or just I guess that kind of safety net, like you mentioned, I think is just nice for people.
Yeah, I still think it's a great opportunity to build a base out in the end somewhere and be able to walk back to that after having gone to the overworld on like a supply run, and not having to worry about traveling however many thousands of blocks in order to get back there. I think even people who want to join a server and then hide, you think of those anarchy servers where people just like hunt down your base in order to destroy it because that's like there are no rules on the server. I can imagine people setting up those teleporters to hide a base somewhere in an obscure location in the end and be able to walk back there safely without having to worry too much about it being discovered. That'd be an audacious plan if you're on a server where you feel like your stuff could just be hunted down and raided at any moment.
Man, I don't know what I would feel on a server like that. If people started coming into my base and destroying stuff, like I don't know. I think it's one of the reasons why I don't like PvE in world building games. Like if you're playing like Factorio, that's one thing I didn't like about Factorio. Like I wanted to learn the mechanics and do these cool things in Factorio, but then I had to defend against these bugs that kept on coming and eating my stuff. And it's like, this is annoying and it's not fun. I think it lines up for me in the same way that whenever we've heard Minecraft developers talking about why there's no tornadoes in Minecraft,
natural disasters and stuff,
because it doesn't feel good as a player. And I mean, granted, if you're signing up to an anarchy server, then you are opting in for that experience, like you're going there for that. But like as someone that knows they don't like that, I wonder how it would be to like, all right, well, I'm doing this. Like I feel like I would be on constant defense because my personality would just not be on offense. Like I don't see myself going in and trying to just ransack someone's base and feeling good about it. And that just is probably 7 to 8 years of Minecraft experience, just like of being peaceful and happy and building nice things,
I think it tickles the same part of those people's brains that they enjoy hardcore, where like there's a notion that one wrong move could mean you lose the entire world. It's like the kind of people who are in it for the thrill and are willing to risk it all because either they've decided at the end of the day it doesn't really matter and it's all about the experience of getting there, or they're just like in it for the excitement of like, what if this could all go wrong, and the adrenaline keeps them going. But yeah, not a play style for you or I don't think, but it'd be interesting to hear from somebody who has that kind of experience. In the meantime, thinking of you and I and play style, I've seen that you've been playing Minecraft this week, Joel, so let us know what's new on the Citadel.
So I dropped back into the Citadel on Saturday to finish up the Iron Farm details that I haven't been working on for the last little while. And I always had this idea that I had a few more checkboxes, where the door to the iron farm storage was exactly the same as the door to the moss farm, because the old design of the iron farm was very spruce and wood based, and the new one is it's got some wood in it, but it's mostly copper and leaves, and it looks very different. And the bottom especially is very deep slate, like lots of grays and blacks and oranges. And so I thought the door could use some TLC. And what I decided to do was the acacia and copper block pipe designs that I have kind of swirling around on the bottom. I decided just to have an additional pipe on the back, which was always the plan. I just didn't do it because I was constantly walking back and forth back there and it would just be in the way. And then I decided, well, I could make the door out of the pipe. So the pipe actually comes out of the iron farm, the melting pot where the golems are destroyed, and then kind of squirrels its way around the frame of the door. And then I've got copper doors and copper trapdoors. And what's nice about that is it also allows you to see the nether portal inside the room. So as a player, you kind of go, oh, wait a minute, that's not just a door to a small storage room. Like there's a destination in there. Like there's a reason to go in this room. And that's where the shulker boxes are for the iron blocks, all the poppies and the different dyes that I set up and everything in there, along with a workroom and like a backup area with like beds and behind the storage access. But those are all hidden behind the nether portal. Like you kind of have to walk through the nether portal and then know where to go to kind of pop out the side on the back. And so I've left those open because at some point I'm sure something's going to break or I have to go back and fix something. And you can't tell that there's these little access portals there. So I've got that sorted out. Really happy with the way that it turned out. I ended up putting a shroom light behind a copper trapdoor, so it kind of looks like almost like an electric bulb in the wall, just to kind of get a little bit of extra light back there. Because in adding the copper and acacia pipe work, I ended up covering up some of the shroom lights that were lighting up the surrounding area. So I kind of had to add one just to kind of make sure there's no creeper surprises when you walk out. Because when you go to our nether hub and you go to the iron farm and the moss farm and the nether hub, you come out through that nether portal in the storage room, which is great if that's the only place you want to go. But if you have to go to the moss farm, you have to go outside. And I don't want people opening up those copper doors and having a creeper surprise. By the way, love the sound of the copper doors because I have not worked much with copper trapdoors and certainly have not worked much with copper doors. And now that I have installed them, I was constantly going in and out of them the whole stream. I never tired of the cool clink noise that they make. Like I think it's really, really satisfying to go back and forth. And then the other things I did were the path that connects to the rest of the area had to be sorted out, as well as the bottom portion of the moss farm storage redesign. And that was just a matter of like taking the existing moss farm blocks like tuff and mossy cobble and kind of like blending those down into the hillside so it didn't look plunked on top of things. And that's what I did. It's a very simple, straightforward approach to just like layering tuff and mossy cobble and some moss carpet and just trying to blend it in. Unfortunately, I'm in a weird biome. It's like a river biome and a forest biome, so the grass color doesn't really mesh well with moss. So I kind of have to do like a quick, like a short blending. Like it's not as smooth as I would like, but it is what it is. I can't change where everything is in the biome. Same thing with the path. Like restrictions there were, it's a 7-year-old palette. It's a 7-year-old design as far as the path goes. I've gotten better as a builder. I have access to way more blocks than I did 7 years ago. And I had to keep my thumb on my backpack of like, nope, you can only use what's existing here. Don't add any more, because if you do, you'll be retexturing 4,000 blocks of paths in an area that no one goes on the server. So like it's just one of those things where I really had to keep myself restricted to not go down that rabbit hole of retexturing everything. But it was fun to kind of go in there and check off some things. The ritual of cleaning up the work site, packing up all your shulker boxes, leaving a chest full of a couple of blocks that are nearby in case like a creeper blows up. I wanted to leave some like tuff and mossy cobble and some things around. So that's all there. Squirreled the backup zombie away with some location information on a sign in case anybody needs them, in case something happens to our zombie in the iron farm. And everything seems to be working fine. It's not perfect in terms of like the ratios of dyes and all that kind of stuff, but like whatever. It's one of those farms that just will continuously go. There's overflow installed, so if anything fills up, it just gets thrown into a cactus, so we're not going to have item build up. So I'm really not too worried about it. After that, I just walked back to West Hill, took the long way, and kind of looked around in West Hill and kind of thought, okay, well, now that I'm done that and I'm back here, I really do want to check off this kind of adventure in terms of building West Hill. What's next? And ultimately, it just comes down to like landscaping around the town. That seems to be the big thing. I've got a couple of farms left to do. So there's a couple of buildings I'll have to make, but a lot of it is going to be returning to like grass and moss and rocks and trees and like trying to figure out how to make things look interesting without really adding too much distraction. And the biggest question I have is there's a curtain wall that goes around West Hill. There's a big area, like a grassy lawn area outside of the wall. I don't want to put a big tree there because I don't want to obscure the view. And it also would not make sense because the people that live in the town or protect the town would cut the tree down because it would be a security risk, in terms of like protecting people maybe attacking or potentially having access to the wall to climb the tree. So I'm trying to figure out what I could put in front of the wall that's not just rocks and paths. Like I want it to be something else. And it doesn't make any sense for there to be like market stalls there. It doesn't make any sense for there to be like a broken down wagon because it's just too big of a space. I can put that next to the road, but like I've already done that too. So I'm trying to figure out like what else I could do to make the area more interesting. So if anybody has any thoughts, by all means, let me know on Twitter or leave a comment on the YouTube channel. It's Joel Duggan VODs on YouTube. That VOD is out right now, so you can go and watch and see me do all the things. But yeah, I'm trying to figure out what might be next. And I have other things to do while I think about that, but it's one of those final parts that's right next to the town that I really want to get right,
Yeah, I'd have to see the space to really get a feel for what I would put there. But yeah, I feel like I'm the type of person to make a decision where like, who cares whether it's defensible or not? Put a big tree there. Like, I feel like I've done that with the castle in Survival Guide 1. Everyone said like, this is the worst place to defend a castle because it's like in the dip of this valley with these two mountains either side, and people could very easily get over. And I was like, I'm not thinking about that, guys. I just wanted to build a big castle. But yeah, I can see if you put that much thought into West Hill already, you've sort of got to match that level of thinking when it comes to anything new that you add to it at this stage. The trapdoors, the copper trapdoors, I think look really good in the screenshots you provided. I was trying to figure out what looks different about them to what I'm used to, and it's you've got the 3D models for the doors and trapdoors, right? You've got like the inside edges are filled in. That adds like a surprisingly cool amount of depth for me, and maybe it's the shaders adding a bit of shadow to them as well, but I feel like that looks good in the copper trapdoor design in a way that I didn't really expect, and I've never really got fully on board with having 3D trapdoors of like the other trapdoors that have transparency in them, but for whatever reason it really works for me with copper.
Yeah, I really like the 3D trapdoors. I've had them for a very long time. I think it was a texture pack from Vanilla Tweaks. And over time, as they've added more trapdoors that have more intricate geometry to them, I find it really helps for me keep Minecraft looking more like a modern game. I find that old doors and old trapdoors tend to be a little on the PlayStation 1 graphic side. When it comes to stuff like that. It can also backfire. Like sometimes there's too much. Like I don't notice it as much because it is subtle, but in the first version of the spruce trapdoors, they had like a depth to all the different lines. Like the texture actually had like a almost like a washing board kind of vibe to it. And the newer version of the texture pack is a little bit more subtle, so it's nicer that way. I felt that those flat trapdoors could have done without the depth. Like I don't necessarily need it on the ones that don't have any kind of holes in them, but I do really like the depth that they add. And I think what I like about it is that because of that depth, it adds the complexity to what you would expect with some sort of like steampunky pipework or sturdy panel that's meant to hold something together or to hold something back. I find it really, really works out. And again, adds depth to doors. Anything that you can do in Minecraft to make something feel like it's got some depth and detail with as few blocks as possible without sacrificing like having to have like your door be 3 blocks thick, to make it look like it's got some depth to it. But I do find them really useful. The tricky part I find with all of the copper is pick block doesn't work unless you already have waxed versions in your inventory. So like if there's a waxed copper door or a copper trapdoor and you've got copper trapdoors in your inventory because you're only waxing the ones you need, you're not waxing dozens, you're just kind of waxing as you go. when you go to pick block, it doesn't work because it doesn't pick up on the one that's in your inventory because it's not waxed. So I do find that a little bit tricky. And I don't have any screenshots of the UI, but I really like the UI texture pack from Vanilla Tweaks that puts like a yellow line around waxed copper blocks and sub blocks in your inventory. So you can very quickly see the difference between that's waxed and that's not, because it's got like a gold outline around it. Brilliant. It's so useful when you're dealing with, I mean, I was only dealing with a couple different copper blocks, but if you're dealing with like the full copper palette where you've got like 16 different versions of things, like, man, that would be super, super handy.
Yeah, I mean, once again, we come back to my argument for always pre-aging copper, right? It's like I like pre-aging copper because then you don't have to worry about whether you've got the waxed variant or whatever. You always just put it down wherever you want it to, and then scrape off the oxidation to the point you are, and then wax it, and you don't have to worry about it after that. But yeah, you can maybe see an argument for waxing it at different stages and stockpiling those even. But yeah, it's a fun range of blocks to work with. I'm looking forward to working with copper some more in the Windy City, so we'll have to compare notes a few weeks on.
Moving on into the news, this week a new snapshot is out. Minecraft Java Edition Snapshot 24W46A was published on November 13th, 2024. Changes in 24W46A. Wither skeletons no longer have bows as their preferred weapons. Creaking will not persist when a world is reloaded. The mining speed and blast resistance of creaking hearts has been doubled. Resin sounds have been adjusted to be softer. Resin clumps can be placed on any full face of a neighboring block, and resin clumps can now be waterlogged and therefore be placed underwater. Some technical changes in 24W46A. The data pack version is now 60. Removed the creaking _ transient entity type. Removed the trim _ templates item tag. And added hashtag wither _ skeleton disliked weapons tag for weapons that the wither skeletons don't want to pick up. The resource pack is now version 45. All blocks that previously rendered only a block entity, like banners, heads, beds, chests, conduits, decorated pots, shulker boxes, and signs, will now also render a normal block model over it. The same behavior as bells, enchantment tables, etc. Note, a rendered block entity still cannot be removed or data-driven. This change only affects the previously ignored block models. There's a long list of changes to item models in the Minecraft.net changelog. If you want to dive into the details, we'll have that available on our website. Notable bug fixes in 24W46A. Rabbits can occasionally get stuck on the edges of blocks. When a leashed bee enters a hive, the leash disappears. Neutral mobs don't pathfind correctly to their target after being unleashed. Suspicious stew gives different durations of blindness or 4 eye blossoms and azure blue. Using items underwater can force you to exit swimming mode. All of those bugs, as well as many others, have been fixed. A full list of those bugs, as well as the other data information, can be found on the Minecraft.net changelog article, linked in our show notes at thespawnchunks.com.
So one of the bug fixes immediately jumped out at me, no pun intended, because it's about rabbits. I have this one rabbit in the survival guide world who's been stuck around my melon and pumpkin farm for months now, because rabbits have this thing. I don't know if you've experienced this much if you haven't really worked with rabbits, but they get into their running kind of like escape, the kind of panicked animation where they just kind of like skip in place when they get to the edge of a block. And this also occurs when you're trying to lead them on a lead. And if they don't get out of that by like stepping down onto a block and kind of settling down, then they cannot jump. And so that means they get stuck on a single block. If you're traveling up like a hill of terrain that you haven't placed like slabs or stairs on or whatever, they cannot get up a height of a single block, which most other mobs can very easily. And so moving rabbits around is a pain in the butt. Take it as somebody who had one of them as a pet on Minecraft SOS and had to bring it back through the nether. That was both tense and also very tedious. But this one rabbit has, I think, been stuck in a 1x1 hole in just one of the pockets of the terrain in Survival Guide Season 3 World 4, probably since June or July or something, and is finally going to be free once this update arrives. Like, I'm fairly certain it's skipped around here and there. It got stuck by the blacksmith for a while and then hopped away when I nudged it as I was walking past, and then it went to go and get stuck somewhere else. But Now I think it's probably just going to die from a 3-block fall wherever it finds one of those, but at least it's going to be free and live its best life before that happens.
I cannot remember the last time that I saw a rabbit in Minecraft. The desert that we have on the server is a mining desert, and unless they have to spawn on sand, like I feel like we might have removed a lot of their spawning spaces. There's still sandstone left around, but even that is getting scarce. So
yeah, I forget how spawning rules work for passive mobs. I think a lot of them have to spawn on grass, and the ones that are in unusual biomes, like you get rabbits in snow plains as well. I think those can probably still spawn on like grass blocks, or whether a powdered snow layer or a snow layer makes any difference, I'm not sure. But yeah, right. Desert rabbits probably have to spawn on sand blocks. I think it's the same with pillagers.
I have not seen one in a very long time. The only memory I have is I think some snapshots that I was working with back when geodes were first entered. I happened to be in a desert when I loaded into that map, and I just decided to stay because there was a village. It gave me an easy house. It gave me an easy access to trades. Like it enabled me to get the early game going up and running because I was doing a survival test of the snapshots. And I do remember seeing rabbits around there, and I don't remember any reason. I would not have gone after them because that was pre-bundles, I think. So like I can't see, I wasn't hunting down rabbits. I do remember walking through a desert, I don't know which one it was, and having that 3-block fall rabbit death noise and only looking over to see like a puff of smoke. And so like, well, that was a rabbit.
Yeah.
Like I don't remember seeing it. I remember hearing it and seeing what was left of it, but that's it. So I've not really had a lot of interaction with rabbits in the game.
I've only ever really had to chase them down lately in Minecraft Bingo when I've played that occasionally, and honestly, if a rabbit dies near you, it's actually a good thing because half the time you need to just get and cook a rabbit, and you don't have to worry about like chasing it around with a sword or trying to find a dandelion that you can use to lure it in. But yeah, like they're occasionally useful. They're obviously not going to have any real benefit to the player now that bundles are made with leather, unless you're after jump boost potions specifically, because rabbit hide, rabbit meat, they're all just like extra bonus items in the game that don't really have much of a use. You can buy rabbit stew from butcher villagers, so there's so many different ways of getting it that don't involve having to hunt down rabbits. I think they should really just be a pet animal, but then difficult to keep them contained. The other things that jumped out at me from this snapshot is changes to the Creaking Heart, really. They have doubled the time it takes to mine and doubled the blast resistance as well. So I think at this point, the intended way of dealing with the Creaking Heart is going to be to run through a forest at night. Anytime a creaking emerges, you tap it to generate resin and then keep running. And then the following day, you go back and find the resin trees when you are at your leisure to mine the Creaking Hearts inside them without worrying about creaking sneaking up on you. Because if it takes longer to mine those, then you have to inevitably turn your back to the creaking for longer, or leave yourself open to attacks from other mobs, and I find them relatively difficult to deal with anyway. I suppose you can pillar up maybe to avoid their attacks as long as you're 4 blocks off the ground, but it's still a bit of a pain trying to take out a Creaking Heart when you're under that high-stress situation of being pursued by something. So I can imagine a lot of players waiting until daytime to find the Creaking Hearts now just because they take longer to mine.
Yeah, the thing that jumped out for me was the resin changes. I thought that was a fun change to have more flexible faces of blocks to put resin on. And then the underwater placement as well. Like that's really cool, because you would think in Minecraft that you either wouldn't be able to place it at all, or water that would be coming into it would then rinse it off, would wash away the hard-earned decoration that you've done. But then you also think like, well, like it's not quite the right color for something like barnacles, which are typically white, but like you can get all kinds of like sea foam or kind of like weird kind of moldy growth, like whether that's around a dock or whether that's around a larger pier in a city. Like you could add a lot of texture to some of your water builds by having underwater resin placed on the face of blocks, and maybe it's underwater or like gold on the bottom of an ocean that you're trying to decorate. Like there's all kinds of really cool options for that. Things on a boat, like if you want the boat to feel like it's older by putting stuff on it that looks like it's been around for a while. Like really, really neat ideas that they're using for resin from a decoration perspective anyway.
Yeah, you can imagine that being like on beaches as little kind of red and orange shells and that kind of thing that have washed up. Like, yeah, you can do a bunch with it, and I think it's fun to make that stuff more versatile. Brings it in line with the expected behavior from other blocks that behave like it as well, like glow lichen. So yeah, I think it makes perfect sense to have resin placed the same way. Just helps with intuitive use of it and player expectations and that kind of thing. I did get confused by the changelog verbiage of that, and I actually changed it for our snapshot notes because it said resin clump blocks, and I thought they were talking about blocks of resin that you handcraft, when what it actually meant was like the block that you put in the world, or the block that the resin clumps items become when you place them. And so like this is the inevitable problem with them having to communicate concepts like this, because it's an item when it's in your inventory and it's a block when it's in the world. It gets a little bit difficult to parse the language around that. So hopefully that's clarified it for the newsread. But yeah, a little confusing when I read it in the changelog for the first time.
Yeah, I think the resin as a Minecraft block, as we think about it, is called block of resin as opposed to a resin block. You know, like they go back and forth and on that. But like no one in regular conversation wants to call it a block of resin because it's more to say. You know, it's just resin block. You know,
it's like people not saying boat with chest, right? Like that's the same thing.
Precisely. Yeah. It's a chest boat. You know, like call me wrong, fine, but like no one's going to call it a boat with chest or minecart with chest, like that kind of stuff. Is a little bit rough. And I mean, I'm sure that there's a reason for it in terms of like probably the back end and like how they're named and how they have to organize stuff. But yeah, it doesn't roll off the tongue necessarily. And I find that with the changes to the models and the entity rendering and stuff, I also had to go through and I added a couple of words just to kind of make it easier to read. I don't know whether that made it incorrect, but like it was just not easy to understand as it was written in the changelog. I will say that more control over block models is good. As someone that has been building bigger and bigger in Minecraft and wanting to take screenshots from farther and farther away, you know, when my texture pack for my trap chests renders them as spruce wood instead of the orange that they normally are. But then if I'm too far away, you can't see them at all, so it doesn't matter. So it looks like maybe the walls of my town are completely empty if you're far enough away. But when you get up close, like all the chests and the details kind of render in. The barrels are still there, but the chests next to the barrels will disappear. Also, when you back up far enough, it's like, why is there a random crafting table in the middle of that field? Oh, when you get closer, there's like 20 shulker boxes around it because that's where my shulker island is, right? But it doesn't, like the crafting table renders, but then nothing else did. So it's cool that players can have control over that. And I imagine, you know, as someone that wants to have player immersion, wants to decorate with those blocks, I also think about Minecraft players and designers that work really, really large and then ultimately use chests or entity blocks as textures or as a way to communicate a certain shape because they're less than one block in width or something like that. And now if you're dealing with somebody that's doing like a Minecraft art piece and in a blank canvas where it's the full world height, now at least they could use a texture pack to get all of the different things they want to rendering in, right?
Yeah, I also remember that being a problem. I'm not sure if it's still the case, but on Bedrock Edition, when the Wild update launched, mangrove roots would not render until you got close. So mangrove forests looked really weird until you got close enough that all of the roots would load in, and they were a tile entity type of block instead of being a solid block because of the transparency that they wanted to give them. And so yeah, it screwed up a lot of people's perception of them in Bedrock Edition, which was kind of strange. And hopefully it's a similar approach that they'll be able to take on Bedrock as well. But yeah, I wonder what that means for occasional exploitation of that render distance thing with entities. Like on Hermitcraft right now, Etho built a firework rocket shop that's entirely made out of shulker boxes, and it's a secret shop, so you can't see it from far enough away. You have to know where it is and then fly towards it for it to render in, and then you can figure out how to land on it and buy your fireworks. And so I wonder if stuff like that is going to be a thing of the past with changes like that being made. But if it's just based on whether or not you've added something to a resource pack to help it render, then that's something else entirely, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and on the flip, like if you want shulker boxes to be used as part of your design, like if you like the gray shulker box, you want that to be part of your wall or part of your steampunk design, you know,
that like
part
spiral
of your
texture that they have underneath, the kind of like fairly unique texture that they've got. Yeah, I can see people wanting to use that.
So now it'll render in from a distance rather than just not being there when you kind of back up to take a screenshot or even just walk through your world. I think that's the biggest thing for me. It's the immersion breaking of walking up to something and having it pop into your view. It's like, oh, right, playing a video game where, you know, even as blocky as Minecraft is, I find that I can suspend my disbelief because I've been in the game for so long. But then when things start to pop in and out of render distance, you're like, that's a little bit weird.
The one thing I never expected to use shulker boxes for, but in retrospect makes a lot of sense, is if you have, those Greek columns that have the kind of curled section at the top, like the bottom of a white shulker box looks really good for those. And that's like the most expensive pillar design I can think of possibly using. But if you've got a shulker farm, then it might be worth using them for decorative details as well. Let's move on into the meat of this show. This is going to be our Chunk Mail Dispenser episode. We do one of these every month where we like to highlight email from the community. And if you'd like to email the show, we read emails every week on every show, regardless of whether we have a main discussion topic or not. The email address is spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. Keep your emails short and to the point. If you can, it helps us include them in the show more easily. A nice clear subject line is going to help us sort the wheat from the chaff as well. And I'll read you this first one. This comes in from Captain Kramer, and the subject is a simulation question. Hello, Pix and Joel. I had a question I've not been able to find an answer to online. I understand how simulation distance generally works. Get too far away from my iron farm and it stops working, or my crops stop growing. My question is how the game calculates vertical distance. If, say, I am set to simulation distance 4, am I able to build stuff from Bedrock to build height and still have them work? What about things like geodes? If my base is above 1 but separated by hundreds of blocks, will the crystals still update? Or is the simulation distance calculated in more like a sphere around the player, similar to mob spawning? Thanks for all the help over the years. Loving the new video format. Captain Kramer died while trying to build a flower farm at world height.
Flower farm at world height is an interesting place to put a flower farm. But I guess if you're trying to stack all of your farms and have them load in your simulation distance, then it makes sense that you'd run out of space horizontally quite quickly as you expand your farming efforts. Typically, and feel free to jump in here because you're going to have as much, if not more, experience in this as I do because of the survival guide. When the game refers to a chunk, it's referring to the full height of a chunk. That's how I've understood it for a very long time. And to quote a couple bits from the Minecraft wiki, simulation distance is a world creation setting in Bedrock Edition that controls mob spawning and despawning and tick updates. In Java Edition, simulation distance is a video setting relating to the render distance to restrict tick update distance. These ticks include random ticking of crops, amethysts, and such. The simulation distance is purely chunk-based and has nothing to do with the player position inside the chunk. So that, to me, says that the player position inside the chunk doesn't matter, and that would include the Y position. So the X, the Z, and the Y vertically. So it doesn't say specifically height. It just kind of says player position doesn't matter. But because what I know about chunks and what they are, and what that says about player position, to me that says that player position on any axis is flexible. The Bedrock simulation distance is a taxi cab distance. So to explain that to people that maybe don't know, think about moving chess pieces on a chessboard. Like you can only go forward, back, left, and right, depending on which chess piece you have. That would be a good example. Would maybe like a knight or a pawn would have a taxi cab movement pattern, whereas something like a bishop would be more Euclidean distance or like a radius. In Java, mob spawning works on a Euclidean distance, but in Bedrock Edition, simulation distance is taxi cab, so it's going to be a little bit different depending on what version you're playing. In Java Edition, simulation distance defines a square region of chunks around the player where entities are ticked. Using a distance of 6, for instance, entities may move naturally within a 13 by 13 chunk column around the player chunk. So it's not taxi cab and it's not Euclidean. In Java, it's a radius or a diameter of a square. And so you have the chunk that you're in, and then you have the number of chunks out from that chunk, and that makes a big like skyscraper-like portion of the world that is then your simulation distance from where you are as a player. So your geode will tick if it's at the bottom of the world and your flower farm is at the top of the world and they are within your designated simulation distance. They should both work.
Important thing to remember, it's so easy to imagine, because chunks are 16 by 16 on the ground, it's so easy to imagine that the game also wants them to be 16 blocks high, and they're not. They load in a full column from Bedrock to build height, so they're 16 by 384 by 16, if you want to go like X, Y, Z axes. And I used to get this all the time when I used to do one chunk tutorials, was that I build in a 16 by 16 area, and then people would say, oh, you built this more than 16 blocks high. And I'd have to be like, it doesn't actually matter. Like, it matters maybe if you've got a height restriction on importing stuff using structure blocks, but that didn't limit the height to 16 either, even when they were much more limited than they are now. And yeah, like, chunks always load fully vertically. You can see this when you're just observing chunk loading going around your world as well. Like, when the ground loads in below you, if there's like a floating island above it, it's going to load in at exactly the same time. And so that's kind of your in-world hint that the entire chunk there is being processed. I get that it's also a little bit difficult in terms of crop growth, because you might have a render distance that loads your wheat farm, but your simulation distance isn't causing the wheat to grow. But frankly, it's easy enough to understand once you get your head around the concept that the world is just comprised of these giant columns. And geodes often occur so deep underground that they would have very little chance of actually growing any crystals at all if the random tick radius was spherical. So it's all just related to which chunks of the world are loaded around the player horizontally, and vertical height just doesn't matter at all.
The way that I like to think about it is like, if you remember pencil crayons or crayons when you're a kid, and you just grabbed a big bunch of them, like as many as you could hold in your hand. You know, you got 6 or 8 or 12 crayons, and the full height of the crayon is the chunk, right? So depending on how big your hands are is how many crayons you could hold. And so it's these vertical columns. I'll have a link to the simulation distance as well as the chunk article on the Minecraft wiki. And on the chunk article, there's a very good visualization of a 16 by 16 by 320. Obviously, they don't include all the sky in the image, but as far as like from the surface of a birch forest all the way down to bedrock, they give you what it looks like. And that should help you kind of visualize what these chunks are looking like. I think the confusion comes from simulation distance being different in Bedrock versus Java. And also the language, even on the wiki, as clear as it is, I think it was only clear to me because I've got extra experience on this show and 7+ years in Minecraft. If I was brand new tomorrow, I don't know that it would be the most straightforward explanation in terms of what distance is and how it's different between Bedrock and Java, or why. They don't give you a why. They just say, well, it's different. It's like, all right, well, like, why is it taxicab on one and not the other? There's no explanation as to why. And I find that generally when I want to know the answer to these questions, what cements it in my brain is why, and they don't often give you that.
Yeah, I think a lot of Minecraft stuff, like a lot of the technical behaviors in Minecraft, rely so much on this esoteric knowledge that you've accumulated over however many years, right? And the wiki is being written by people who've probably been playing Minecraft for the full 15 years it's been around, and so it's not always the easiest information to digest, but the information is out there, and hopefully we've provided some clarity for you.
Our next email comes in from Sarah G. Mining in Deepslate versus Stone. Hi, Pix and Joel. I've been digging a giant mine in my Minecraft world, and I noticed that the Deepslate layers of the world have less block types than the stone layers do. Deepslate, tuff, and gravel versus stone, andesite, diorite, dirt, granite, and gravel. Considering that the Deepslate layer is bigger than the stone layer, do you think that there should be more block types in it? Thanks for the great podcast. Sarah G. was crushed by inventory management. No doubt in the depths of the world. Sarah needs an ender pearl teleporter to get back to the chests, so you can dump your deep mining bits. I mean, unfortunately, you then have to find your way back to that spot if you're meant to maintain the same mine. But I guess you could use an ender pearl teleporter for both. Like, you could set one up before you go back. That sort of thing.
Yeah, bringing the components for it is even more inventory management. But I did discover that they can basically all fit into a bundle, including the ender pearl, based on the small kind of footprint of the design that I had, as long as you've got a bucket of water with you anyway. So yeah, like, I think there is certainly room to add more block types in the Deepslate layers of the world, but I think being crushed by inventory management is ironic because, of course, if you add more layers of different material when you're mining, then you run into the inventory problem again. You run into, not having enough space for all of these different types of material, and even bundles won't help you that much if you're bringing home stacks of it just from going mining, right? So I think there's certainly room to add more blocks. Whether or not there should be more blocks is another matter entirely. It depends on the role of those blocks as well. If you talk about there being more block types in terms of ores, that's a different discussion to more decorative stone types. I think I would personally love a question about this stuff to be answered by a geologist, because while Minecraft is by no means an accurate emulation of the real world, it's definitely inspired by it in terms of the names of some of these materials, where you're going to find different like strata of materials and different ores. And I think I would be really interesting to know if variations in stone types appear more frequently closer to the surface, or if further down, where you've got magmatic activity going on down there, and the pressure is turning rocks into different types of rocks. That's what metamorphic rock is. It's like over enough time and pressure, it compresses into a different form of material. Is it more common to have that variety deeper into the Earth's crust, closer to like the mantle or whatever? I find that rock strata in real life occurs in flat layers a lot more than the blobs we find in Minecraft's generation. So it would be interesting to see if Minecraft would choose to emulate that, or if the stone layer and then the Deepslate layer is about as close as we're ever going to get to like flat line stratification of material. But I think it's going to be interesting to have a discussion with somebody at some stage to figure out whether it's logical that more blocks exist in the Deepslate layers. So geologists, write in, let me know. I'd be really curious to hear your thoughts on that.
And as someone that spent a good amount of time hiking in South Utah several years ago, where, I mean, that's the whole premise for the park, is that it used to be ocean, like it used to be ocean floor, and the pressure and sedimentary rocks and stuff have been pressed together. But just because they're in layers, like you said, doesn't mean they're in horizontal layers, because as the earth and tectonic plates have shifted and erosion happens, some of these layers are on angles, some of them are vertical, and it creates some really beautiful looking stuff. And we get a glimpse of that in like Badlands in Minecraft. You can kind of see the strata and the layers, and then the erosion and stuff happening in the eroded Badlands. But with deep underground and Deepslate, like I agree with you. I think that it would be neat if they kind of made it make sense, as opposed to just sticking blobs of stuff, because that's where I, again, feel like I'm kind of taken out of it, and doesn't really feel much like an environment. It feels like this is the blob of stuff you're supposed to collect or avoid, or it's going to be annoying because now you have to mine through this, different kind of thing that you don't want. Again, going back to inventory management, I like the idea of having more decorative blocks. I think the only drawback there, or player feedback, would be, say they added something like veins of some sort of like deep blue stone, and maybe it's something that has like a family of blocks, just like a lot of the other decorative blocks, where you can make slabs and stairs and bricks, maybe something that we could all use for these mystical blue tiles for roofs that we all want so much as builders. That would be fantastic. Maybe they're green, I don't know, but I feel like it should be darkish, or not necessarily like a bright color, something that would make sense to be found within Deepslate, so it didn't stand out like a sore thumb. But then, like, builders are going to want a lot of those, and that means that you're going to have to go and mine a lot of that stuff, which is what you have to do for Deepslate. But like, do players necessarily want to do that for a decorative block that's not going to be everywhere? Like, Deepslate is everywhere when you get down to that level, so it's not difficult to find. Whereas if you're looking for something specific, like say right now, if you wanted to use lapis blocks, like that becomes a little bit harder to get a lot of, versus something like a tree farm, or I think about another, block that you can just get a lot of from a farm to make things. And that becomes a more accessible block, and therefore a more popular block, because it's less tedious to get. And so that's where my balance would be. Like, if you're adding something that's specifically for builders, as a decorative stone, then how tedious is it going to be to mine through the slower Deepslate to get to this, new stone? Is the new stone also as slow to mine as Deepslate? Like, what are the trade-offs there, as far as, either bragging rights on a server to have a lot of this stuff, or just the time in to get it useful to the player? I know that adding ores can be tricky to Minecraft, but I think that would also make the exploration of Deepslate a little bit more fun, a little bit more rewarding. Going around a corner in a Deepslate cave and seeing a sparkle of something that you've been looking for, that's always fun. It's not as fun when you've been playing Minecraft for a while and it's just like lapis or iron or diamond or something. Like, just something new would be cool. But that opens up the questions like, well, if you add a new ore to Minecraft, does that mean you're adding another armor type, another, use case for things like that? I think copper is a really good example of a ore being added that doesn't conform to what was already in the game and add something new. But if you are going to add a new ore to the Deepslate layers for that excitement, what does it do? Like, is it just another iron? Like, is it just another copper? That doesn't make any sense. That seems like a waste of time, and players would be disappointed. So coming up with something new and innovative that you could then add to that ore, and I don't know what that could be. There's all kinds of, we're in a fantasy world, so it could be absolutely anything. I do like the idea of, another ore that has maybe oxidation, or one of my thoughts would be like keeping with like the deep dark kind of idea of Deepslate would be like a dark iron. I know that it's kind of riffing on iron a bit, but I know a lot of people that would like to have like that dark black wrought iron look. My experience from World of Warcraft made me think of like dark iron dwarves. Same idea. They're dwarves that were just deeper, and they had more dark and fiery kind of aesthetics to them. And I think that could be something cool to add here too. But again, like, is it just more iron? Do people say like, well, like if I want more of that, do I have to go digging deep for it? How come I can't get that from an iron farm? There's all kinds of different stuff like that. And then I tried to think outside the box, and I thought maybe it would be interesting, even though it wouldn't be true to form in terms of your like geological references, having some sort of liquid that you could stumble across in the deep dark would be weird and fun. And I mean, maybe it's oil, like maybe it's something thick and black or purple, and acts different than water, and is not water, like just not an aquifer kind of deep underground, but something different and unique. Maybe it flows slow like lava. I don't know. Just anything like that could be really fun and interesting. And I don't know how this could be pulled off. I'd be very curious to see. But adding a gas to Minecraft that players could collect and use. I mean, like, sure, it's a little bit odd to think about it in cube form, but at the same time, like, we're also carrying around hundreds of thousands of meter by meter stone blocks in a backpack. Like, I think I could forgive the technical stuff to have some sort of gas block. That would be very, very interesting. And maybe it doesn't look like a square. I mean, we've got the smoke from campfires right now as what I use it for gas all the time. Like I use it for steam. I use it for steampunky type situations. It would be neat to have an animated gas that you can actually control where it is. And that maybe it affects certain blocks around it. Like I don't know how that would work, but it would be a really interesting kind of experience to have like gas geysers or something under the ground, or you just mine into a cave and all of a sudden every air block is now a gas block. What does that mean for player exploration? Is it safe? Can you go down there? Do you suffocate like you do if you're swimming underwater? Like, what does that mean? It could be really, really interesting and a neat way to add something different to the Deepslate layers.
That's when you got to bring a parrot with you to simulate bringing a canary down in the mine, right? Like you got to have a parrot in a cage. Like that'd be really interesting. I've seen gases simulated with particles from lingering potions before. I've tried to do that myself once or twice. Dragon's Breath is another good example of something that's represented by a particle and is still gatherable as a resource, if not necessarily then placeable as another block. So yeah, there's some interest to be had. I think the Deepslate layers are still barren enough despite the diversity of biomes that you now find underground. There's 3 of them plus the generic Deepslate caves, so there's a bit of variety, but I can imagine them having plenty of room to add stuff to the Deepslate layers of the world in future. So who knows? The structures got added in the trial chambers. Maybe we'll find some more materials popping up further down the line. Next up, this email comes in from Chicken, and the subject is Concept Art to Minecraft World. Hello, Pix and Joel. I've started listening to your podcast and consequently have gotten back into the wonderful world of Minecrafting. I want to be an artist and work in concept art and design for video games and television. Once I complete a conceptual piece, I try to import the 2D digital art into a 3D Minecraft space. Have you done this either with your art or with others? And if so, how have you executed this task? Very excited for the Pale Forest update, and I love the show so much. Have an amazing day, Chicken.
Well, I mean, all the power to you. I think that's a great way to use Minecraft to explore concept art, what it's like to bring concept art from a game, a piece of art into a game. Especially if you're planning to be the artist, you're going to have to work with like 3D artists and other people that are bringing that into a real video game world. And knowing how that works, I think will just greatly benefit, your knowledge as a concept art designer for sure. I use concept art from other people all the time as inspiration for builds. I don't import the art directly into Minecraft. I'm sure there's a tool for it. Like if you wanted to have a flat picture plane of an image rendered in Minecraft, I'm sure you could find a texture pack or like find a way to do it in a way that would make building or tracing something or getting sort of like your foot ready, a foothold in a build, very similar to what you have as a reference art. I tend to sculpt it out in game. I have that kind of built-in ability to really understand space in a flat image and figure out how I'm going to sculpt that, lay that out, think about it in 3 dimensions while I'm designing the 2 dimensions. Like that kind of stuff is something that I've had for a while. So I try not to take it for granted because not everybody has that muscle, you know? I do find that deciding on the measurement of a Minecraft block within your concept image is usually the first step. So if there's a key window, especially if there's columns or any kind of like vertical detail or horizontal detail like stairs or something, if you decide how big those are going to be based on one Minecraft block equals one of these pieces of measurement in your image, then you can kind of extrapolate from there. Oh, well, that building looks like it's 20 stairs tall. That means it's probably going to be 20 blocks or 10 blocks, depending on how you're doing your Minecraft stuff. And same thing with windows. If the window is round, you have to go at least so big in Minecraft to even get close to having a window look round. And so at that point, you're like, all right, well, that window is 8 blocks wide. And now everything else, if I want to copy this exactly, has to be proportional and relating to that window. And you can measure things out. Like you can drop it into, any free editing software for image stuff will allow you to kind of measure things out. I have made my own art and used that in Minecraft, but because I knew it was going to Minecraft, I was making pixel art. And I was making flat pixel art without really thinking too much about 2D stuff. I was mapping out like the slice of something. So I had found a concept art for Snake Mountain from He-Man and Skeletor, and I had started to build that in my Eternia single player world, the first thing that I did way back in like 2017. And I used pixel art to kind of map out how big I wanted it to be. I was able to then count blocks. And the great thing there about the proportions is that 1 pixel was 1 block. I couldn't really get into adding stairs and slabs in the pixel art, but I just kind of got the blocky form out first in the pixel art. And then I used slabs and stairs in the game to then refine it further, just kind of naturally. In the way that you said earlier, Pix, where you get most of the way there, 75% of the way there in your creative world. And then when you go into survival, that's when you kind of hone things and work it into the landscape and like do all that kind of finesse stuff that is like the last 25% of your build. And I found that the pixel art thing was great because you can count blocks, you can map out height, you can quickly realize, oh wow, this is massive. And going to take a while. I might want to recruit some friends, which is what happened with the Nether Hub. The Nether Hub on the Citadel was designed in Photoshop because that's what I had access to at the time. And what I did was I took a slice of it. So in the middle is the Nether portal. There's the glass floor that it sits on. There's the depth of all the lava and piping below. And then there's the height of the ceiling above. And everything was made to make sure that it fit within at the time, the limit of the Nether in terms of the height restrictions. As well as I didn't want things to not render in, and I didn't want it to be a huge time sink. I didn't want to go too deep and that I was constantly battling lava. So like I wanted to get to the lava, but I didn't want to go deep into it. So there was limits there. I wanted to expose the bedrock at the ceiling, so I knew that I would have a limit there. And so I just kind of planned for that when I designed the pixel art. And it was one of the best ideas I had because it meant that I could shape out the broad strokes. I could give people that were helping me dig it out dimensions and just be like, dig from here to here and from Y93 down to Y43 or whatever it was that we were doing. And it worked out really, really, really well.
I have less experience translating my own art into Minecraft because I feel like Minecraft is the only place that I have a decent canvas for the kind of art I can make. I've never really had the patience or the practice or the training to make much visual art of my own. Like I could just about get by making thumbnails for my YouTube videos every so often. I've done a little bit of 3D modeling in the past, but never to any kind of expert degree. And so I rely really heavily on concept art. It's very useful for folks like me. And I've been doing that this week. You heard in the quick login how I've been working from this one art image that I've had knocking around for a while, and have redone a couple of times to suit whatever project that I have going on. And the challenge with those things is often I can't see the back of this. When it's a 2D piece, you don't always know if the back is going to match the front. You kind of have to start interpreting it yourself from there. And that's the stuff that I'm getting better at, I think, especially with just more practice. Mythical Sausage also has a really great video on transforming concept art into a Minecraft build, so I will recommend that if you want to go and check that out as well. Yeah, overall, I do wish that I was better at original ideas like that, but I find original ideas come more easily to me when I'm using Minecraft as the canvas. So if anything, it's more likely that I'd go the other way around. I'd model something in Minecraft and be like, I don't know, could I draw this? And then go back to a traditional art form and try and like do a pencil drawing of it, or like sketch it, or some digital art or something. But yeah, I feel like I lack the tool set for that. So Minecraft itself is the canvas I prefer to use. I'm also, these days, I've been looking into the way other video games do their art design, their environment design. I obviously took a lot of inspiration from Elden Ring and the Elden Ring DLC more recently for some of my projects in single-player and multiplayer servers. So I think that's a really great thing if there's an existing 3D environment that you can explore. Obviously, there's loads of concept art out there for games like that, but if it's an environment that you can then go and see how other people interpreted concept art into a fully 3D rendered environment, then you have loads of reference for, okay, they clearly decided that this needed more shape or this needed more depth, or like, you know, they add details here and there where there weren't details in the original concept, and there's like a lot of work gets done to bring the original vision of this to life, which is probably being done by a completely different artist. So yeah, there's loads of room for interpretation, especially with something that has the diversity and the emphasis on building that Minecraft does now. So go ham. It's a lot of fun to see this stuff come to life.
And if you're making art specifically for Minecraft, I mean, the advice that I would share would be design stuff chunkier to begin with. Designing fine detail in your concept art is not going to help you do much in Minecraft, because there's only a limit to how small you can get. You've got a limit to how much texture you can show. The example that I like to use when I'm on stream, when I'm talking about this, is usually finding concept art on something like artstation.com for mobile games, specifically like mobile town building games, because the buildings in those games have to be kind of like chunky. You kind of, it's like someone built something out of Lego and then stuck a straw into it and blew into it, and it kind of went pop. Because when you're looking at like a top down or an isometric view on a mobile screen, which is very small, you have to have a very clear silhouette and distinct kind of feature as to what that building is. Is it your granary? Is it your battlement? Is it the town hall? Like, what is it? And usually the roofs in those have really bold outlines, really thick gables, really bright colors, and are often 3 times bigger than the roof really should be for that building. And then the bottom part is like a lot smaller. And because of the way that Minecraft works and how the blocks are so chunky, I find that starting with those can really help you with kind of figuring out what kind of proportions work well specifically to be designed for Minecraft. And you never know, like maybe you'll end up getting a job working for some of the developers that do things for the Minecraft store, right? For the online content, the DLC, where the limitations there might not be so strict because of different packs and textures and things that you can do custom. Like think about like, you know, Star Wars or Jurassic Park being brought into Minecraft. Like there are definitely some custom stuff in those Minecraft Marketplace downloads, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's the other flip side of scale is that if scale isn't a limiting factor, like think about the people that use Minecraft not as like a play space, but as like an art program. And you're thinking like 320 blocks from floor to ceiling, complete void, like you can do anything you want, which means you can build at any scale. Like think about like the giant organic sculptures that people make, floating candles representing like neon lights, and there's all kinds of crazy stuff that you can get into. And so if that's the source, like if that's the level of pixel resolution that you're dealing with in Minecraft on the other end, then your concept art could be a lot more detailed. And so there's a real kind of push and pull there when you're looking at stuff like that. If you find some of the people out there that build really large things in Minecraft, it's incredible the detail that they can fit into it, because we don't often, as survival players, really look at the 320 blocks from your perspective, because you're usually limited by there's just so much stuff in the way. You don't really get to see just how much space that really is.
Yeah, building in a super flat world where it starts at like negative 59 or whatever is very different from building in a survival world, because you start at like Y70 probably minimum, and if you're in like a plains
Mm-hmm.
biome or whatever. So yeah, there's a lot to it. It's very, very different. Yeah, best of luck, and yeah, looking forward to seeing how some of that stuff translates from 2D to 3D.
Last email comes in from Nicholas M. Windchimes. Hi, Johnny and Joel. I randomly thought about being able to use breeze rods and iron nuggets to craft wind chimes. Wind chimes would make sound like real wind chimes, but they could also add wind sound effects to add immersion to a build, like a windy city or a build at a high elevation. I think they could add some more functionality to breeze rods. I've been enjoying the podcast lately. Keep up the awesome work. Thanks. Nicholas was blown up by a creeper while listening to his wind chimes.
I see what you're doing, leaving the words Windy City in there. You're trying to get this idea to appeal to me. This is pandering, and I like it. So, wind chimes, I like the notion of them adding ambient sounds in general. I think the game has a lot of scope for more ambient sounds to be added, and for player control over ambient sounds. We're starting to see more player control over like regional particle effects with stuff like the spore blossom, cherry leaves, and I think the pale garden leaves, the pale oak leaves, are also going to have a particle associated with them. So that stuff is being more put in the player's hands. And while I love the idea of there being sound effects that you can do something similar with, I also love the notion that wind chimes could be a way of telling the game, I want wind effects here. Like, I want the breeze to, not the breeze, the mob, but the like a gust of wind to blow through. And that could be what has control over effects that we already see in the game, like the breeze kind of wafting a banner gently in the wind. And other effects on the environment, maybe like the way particles would travel, maybe even a little bit of an influence on the directional travel of arrows, that kind of thing. And I feel like by the same token, not having wind chimes would give us control over banners not blowing in the wind. So I like the idea of there being a bit of a give and take there, of like, you know, players can have control over whether something happens, which also means we can have control over whether something doesn't happen. And I feel like wind charges don't do a whole lot to provide like that constant wind effect. They have a sudden impact and then they're gone, and obviously have a limited supply of them. And nothing really provides ambience like that except for maybe rain. But I was looking into it on the Minecraft wiki, and a surprising amount of effects are caused by rain, in terms of, you know, fires and stuff get put out, entities like mobs that are on fire end up not on fire, it hydrates farmland, it does have some effects on certain blocks, even if it's not converting lava to obsidian or whatever. So I'm kind of curious if the wind, if implemented fully in Minecraft, could have a mechanical effect on certain things that might be kind of nice to see. And it doesn't have to go as far as it does in shader packs, where there'll be a constant wind that's like blowing the grass around and the grass model is moving and everything. But I would like to see a little bit more ambient environmental stuff happening, and a block like wind chimes could be a really great way of the player having control over that from day one.
And sound is really immersive. I think that's a really good way to get some motion that we talk about so often into Minecraft, even though it's implied motion because it's acoustic motion. And right back to what you're talking about, having the player have control of wanting it to move, but then also wanting it to not move. I'm also thinking like, well, what if I want the wind chimes and not the wind noise, or vice versa? I want the wind noise, but I don't want to hear the tinkling of the wind chimes. Like, how would you control that? And the first thought I have was like, well, if you wax the wind chimes, then that would be a way to maybe muffle them. Like, just as a fun, like, it's already in the game. It would be weird, but like, why not? It's Minecraft. Like, that could be a fun way to do that. And I was thinking about other fun ambient sounds and like how you could add them to the games. Things like mechanical noises, clock noises. Now, granted, we can do that with existing redstone components, provided you like the sounds that those redstone components make. You can make like a ticking sound. You can make a clock sound. You can make mechanical noises with pistons. But if you wanted it to sound more modern, like a motor, or if you wanted it to sound more steampunky, like a steam hiss release, we don't really have that so much. We've seen some stuff with data packs, I think, lately with Hermitcraft, with player heads on note blocks making noises and allowing that library to expand and custom stuff. And that's cool, but it's not in the vanilla game and accessible to a lot of people. But I do like that idea of those background noises. And then I go on to thinking about ambient noises, which we have talked about before in forests, like birds, crickets chirping, squirrels, and other forest sounds. But like, how would the player control that? Like, is that just a biome thing? Like, do you put a bird's nest down? Do you put an acorn cluster similar to sea pickles? Like, how do you control those sounds? And again, right back to like, what if you want one but not the other? What if I want to put acorns on the table in my cottage, but I don't want to hear the squirrel, in the walls? Like there's a give and take there. And so it must be really difficult to try and think about that from a game design perspective, to think about like, how can you add those kind of sounds to the game and have them be wanted and unwanted and controlled by the player. I do like the idea of the wind chimes moving, even if they don't make a tinkle noise. I like the idea of putting something down that you could be controlled and say like, I want this to move. Again, like it just goes back to like, that means you can probably only have it be outside and have it make sense. If the wind chimes also looked like a cool chandelier, you wouldn't be able to use them inside unless you wanted them blowing around. That's why I don't use banners for curtains, is because they blow around indoors and it drives me crazy. And so that could be really fun too, to have like hanging banners inside, but hanging banners near a, I don't know, breeze rod or breeze item that you could put, like, even if you could hide it, like if you could hide the breeze rod underground and it's going to affect, the immediate chunk, and say that chunk that breeze rod is in is going to be windy. And then you could put your banners out on a clothesline and have them blow in the breeze. And then you could put your banners inside without the breeze item nearby and have them hang like normal curtains. Like that kind of control would be really interesting. I don't know how it gets executed from a game design perspective.
As somebody who now has one of these in their garden, I'm going to pitch for there being a bird seed like feeder that you could hang from a tree if you want bird chirping noises, because
nice.
Got no shortage of those in my garden these days. And it would be a really great way of getting all of the like wheat seeds that you have as a surplus from growing a wheat field and just like chucking all of those into a bird feeder. Maybe some pumpkin seeds and melon seeds and stuff could go in there as well. That'd be a fun way of doing it. I love the idea of the wind chime being part of it, especially with wind having taken center stage as the addition of the breeze came around, and gives us more uses for breeze rods, which is a fun addition also. I think that is where we'll wrap up today's episode of The Spawn Chunks, though, folks. Had some great emails today, so thank you all for sending those in. You can find more information about our show and links to some of the stuff that we've talked about today over at thespawnchunks.com. The music for the show is composed by me, and The Spawn Chunks is proud to be a listener-supported podcast. If you're getting some value out of the show, why not consider putting some value back in? You can do that at patreon.com/thespawnchunks, where joining our community by pledging at any level gets you an invite to our patrons-only Discord chat. You can listen to the show live when we record it in Discord every Monday. We also have our monthly Minecraft Hangouts, and there's round-the-clock chat where everybody gets to share their opinions on Minecraft and all other things besides. We currently have 306 patrons on the roster, which is holding steady from last week. Special thanks go out to our content engineer patrons, Gunda H. Striker, Hunter555, Jumbo Sale, Mindtrip Media, Party Voyager, and Yitz. Thank you all for your support on this episode.
Sharing the podcast with your friends is the easiest way to support the show. You can find us at The Spawn Chunks on social media. New episodes are available on Mondays on all of your favorite podcasting platforms. The video version, of course, goes out on YouTube. You can email the show at spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. You can find the RSS feed on the spawnchunks.com, and the patron-only RSS feed is on the Patreon page, and that's where you can listen to the render distance, the extended version of the podcast.
My name is Johnny, but online I go by Pixelriffs. You can find most of what I do at youtube.com/Pixelriffs, where the Minecraft Survival Guide is currently in its 3rd season. I also stream 3 days a week on Twitch, although streams have been dropping here and there because I've got other stuff going on IRL. Keep an eye out on the schedule for that one, but I usually do behind-the-scenes work for my YouTube series and play other games from time to time. I'm also the voice of the unofficial Hermitcraft recap, still going strong in Season 10. You can find us through a quick search on YouTube. Aside from that, you can find me at Pixelriffs on Blue Sky and Instagram. Joel, where can people find you online?
Everything that I'm doing online can be found at joelduggan.com. That includes a link to the Citadel Cafe, my other podcast about sci-fi and fantasy entertainment. This past week, Stephen and I talked about Arcane, so that should be hitting the podcaster of your choice soon. You can also follow me on Twitch at Joel Duggan, very easy to find, where I stream Tuesday through Saturday, juggling back and forth now between Minecraft and Satisfactory, and really enjoying both. So expect a lot of that on the Twitch channel.
Thanks for visiting The Spawn Chunks. The world outside is infinite, even if you're a rabbit.